Welcome back to Harbour Unboxed. Small Steve here, and today I have an update on the Corsair 1000D build, aka CoffeeRipper. Now, some of you noticed in the last few videos, this system's been in a few pieces, a few things missing. I did pull out the air coolers for the second gen Threadripper review because it just happened to be that was the time I started pulling this apart, because I got an absolute heap of EK gear to jazz this thing up and finally do the build justice with a whole heap of liquid cooling gear. In short, we have almost 1.4 meters worth of radiators. We have 2 GPU blocks, 2 CPU blocks, 2 massive reservoirs, as you've probably noticed, and 19 Corsair ML series fans. And that created a whole heap of cable management challenges, let's say, because you have 2 cables per fan. So that was a whole heap of fun. Since I don't have too many days spare, or really even a day spare at the moment, due to all the content that we have coming up, I haven't really been able to throw too much time sort of in one big heap at this thing. So I've just been doing a bit here and there, and over the last few days I've got it to this stage, so I thought good time for an update. At this point, pretty much everything is installed now. I just have to do a bit of tube bending and get all that in there, and obviously that'll finish it off, and then I can top it up with the liquids that I have on hand. A few more hours worth of work there, and I'm probably not going to have time to complete all that for about a week, or at least a week from now. So in the meantime, I have quite a bit to discuss about the build to this point, so let's go over that. The first thing I tackled were the front-mounted radiators. These are the EK Coolstream XE480 models. Although they feature an aluminium and steel housing, they are copper finned radiators with copper tubing, and that makes them quite heavy at 2.1 kilograms each. They also have a liquid capacity of 450 milliliters, so that will add almost another half kilo in weight. Not that weight's really any concern for this build. Anyway, installation of the 2 front-mounted radiators was a breeze thanks to the 1000D's telescoping radiator trays, though I will speak about those a bit more later on in this video. This also made installation of the additional 8 120mm fans quite easy, though simply screwing the fans into place really was the easy part. Dealing with the 32 cables, now that was the real challenge. With both radiators and all 16 120mm fans installed in the front of the 1000D, the next step was to install the top-mounted radiator, and for that I'm using the EK Coolstream CE420, which supports 3 140mm fans, and this is where I ran into my first issue, and I suspected even before beginning the build that this may be a challenge. Basically, the front-mounted gear measures 110mm wide in total, as this includes a 60mm thick radiator and then a pair of fans in a push-pull configuration. This does limit the room you have in the top of the case to squeeze in the 420mm radiator, and while it is technically possible, it did come with a compromise, at least in this situation. Unfortunately, I could only install 2 of the 3 fans. Installing a third fan would block the inlet and outlet ports of the front radiators. This is kind of annoying, as Corsair's spec sheet and their website claims you can install up to 2 480mm radiators in the front and then 1 420mm radiator in the top, and although they don't specify the thickness, they do show a case with 60mm radiators installed. The catch here being that the demo build uses what looks to be, or really has to be, a 360mm radiator, which is odd as the top trays only support 140mm, 280mm and 420mm radiators, so that is very misleading. I'm also less of a fan of the telescoping radiator trays because they do limit compatibility with radiators. In my opinion, they do anyway. They sound awesome in theory, but ultimately they end up being a bit pointless, again, in my opinion. They just add unnecessary weight and cost to the case. I would have much preferred they either make this big, huge glass front panel removable, which probably presents quite a few challenges there because it is a big, heavy panel, so I can kind of understand why that is fixed in place. Alternatively, do something like they did with the 500D, which is just some thin aluminium sheets that slide out. You put all the stuff on, slide them back in. Very compatible, very light, and probably a lot more cost effective. And yeah, one of my main issues with the ball bearing runners used to slide the trays out and then back in is that they do take up quite a bit of room. You probably get a sense of that looking at it here. So a more simplistic design like what we saw in the 500D probably would have worked a bit better. Without the space required to fit the runners in, I could have slid the top radiator back, whereas that one there, slid that further back, and then I could have put the third 140mm fan in, and it would have looked a bit better, it would have worked a bit better, and the case would be that much lighter overall and probably that much more affordable. But anyway. Also, one of my biggest criticisms, I suppose, of the trays, apart from all the things that I've just spoke of, is that you can't use the telescoping ability anymore once you do your cable management, because I don't suppose you have 30 centimeters of slack cable, so you can slide it back out. Most of the fan cables aren't even that long to begin with. So once you've installed all your fan cables, you've done your cable management, they don't slide out anymore, and they sure as hell can't slide out once your hard tubing's installed. So it's kind of a one-time deal, and I get that you slide it out so the fans that are really far back are a bit easier to install, but honestly, of this entire build, the absolute easiest part of the installation will be installing the front-mounted fans and radiator, so I don't really see the point. Next up, on the advice of a few Patreon members, we ditched the Threadripper 1950X and replaced it with a 2950X. And I suppose, why not? It's only a very minor upgrade, but it is much easier to make that upgrade now rather than later on once the build is complete. While changing the CPU, I also removed the motherboard's VRM heatsink as I'm installing EK's MSI X399 Gaming RGB monoblock. I was pleased to find that installing the monoblock is extremely quick and easy. Just make sure you install the thermal strip over the motherboard's MOSFET chips and it'll be happy days. Once installed, I think the monoblock looks pretty great. Hopefully you guys agree. I think all I need now is a little bit more of that Corsair Vengeance RGB Pro memory, and that will really set this section of the build off. After all, it's a pretty extreme build and it would be just wrong not to populate all those DIMM slots. Next up, I quickly threw in the EK Supremacy Evo RGB block on the Core i7-8700K, and that is for the little mini ITX build at the bottom of the case. And this is another nice looking block, though sadly I don't think you'll actually get much of a chance to see it once the build's complete, as it will be hidden behind a Radeon RX Vega 64 graphics card. Speaking of which, my next job was to install some VGA blocks. Starting with Vega 64, the first job was to disassemble the reference card, which is a relatively easy process. And then with the stock cooler removed, you just need to install the thermal pads on the massive VRM, apply some thermal paste on the GPU and HBM2 stacks, and then finally screw on the block. I'm using the EKFC Radeon Vega RGB block, and I think it looks pretty impressive. Since you won't see the backside of this graphics card as it is forward facing in the 1000D, I'm just going to stick the standard backplate back on. Then for the Threadripper portion of the build, we have the EKFC GeForce GTX FE RGB block, and since I already had a stripped down 1080 FE card just sitting around doing nothing, this is what I used. Again, the same sort of deal here as what we just saw with the Vega card, though this time you do have to install the individual thermal pads on the memory ICs, as the 1080 uses GDDR5X memory. I didn't actually have the FE backplate handy at the time of installing the water block, so I just went with the naked PCB, which you will be able to see, but I quite like the look of the bare PCB anyway. In my opinion, both graphics cards look absolutely incredible with the EK blocks installed, and I can't wait to see some liquid flowing through them. The last components I had to install were the pumps and reservoirs, and since I'm using two of the massive EK Res X3 400 reservoirs, which measure 400mm tall and have a huge 820ml capacity, I had to remove the 3.5-inch drive cage to make room to install these behemoths. I was aware of this ahead of time, so this wasn't any kind of surprise or sort of last-minute workaround. The cages are technically non-removable, as they are pot riveted into place. But since the build is merely a showpiece and not something I'm going to use on a regular basis, there isn't really much need for anything beyond a few M.2 NVMe SSDs. So that being the case, I would rather just remove the big 3.5-inch drive cage to make way for bigger, more showy reservoirs. Drilling out the hard drive cage was a pretty quick and easy process, though the only technical hiccup here was that I had to lay the case down. And at this point, the case weighed about 35 to 36 kilograms, so bit of a daunting task, that one. Therefore, I also took this opportunity to drill out some holes for the pumps, as they will be mounted in the bottom of the case. For connecting the pumps to the reservoirs, I used an assortment of EK adapters from their black nickel range, and I think again you will have to agree they look rather impressive. So that's about where I'm at now with the build. Quite a few hours have gone into it to get to this point, but yeah, pretty much everything's installed now and I am ready for the hard tubing. I think it's fair to say this is an absolutely ludicrous build, but that's kind of the point, and I've had a heap of fun working with it so far, and I'm personally really pleased with how it's turning out. Hopefully you guys think it looks pretty cool as well. I think it's one hell of a set piece. Hopefully I will have a bit of time, like I said, over the next week to do all the tube bending and get the liquid in there and hopefully no leaks and get it all up and running. But as you're likely aware, we do have some pretty big product releases over the next few weeks, so free time is even more scarce than usual. And that is going to do it for this one. If you did enjoy the video, well, feel free to hit the like button for us. We much appreciate that. Subscribe if you want to see more content, especially more of this build, because like I said, over the next week, hopefully I'll have it finished. No promises though. And if you appreciate the work we do at Unboxed, then consider supporting us on Patreon, where you can gain access to our Discord chat and our monthly live stream and all that good stuff. And as always, thank you for watching. I'm your host, Steve, and I will see you again next time. I'm really far away from the camera. It's all your fault.